Good afternoon. Welcome to the second public consultation for the establishment of a fishing port at Gran, Chemin, Moruga. This presentation is being broadcast on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. I'd like to just introduce you to our presenters. From NIDCO, we have Mr. Devon Rampersad, who is a project manager. And from Coastal Dynamics Limited, we have Ms. Deja Charles, who is a project manager and coastal engineer, Ms. Medina Ismailala, who is a coastal scientist and numerical modeler, and Ms. Jade Pillai from Coastal Dynamics Limited as well, who is a coastal scientist and geomatics engineer. So just to give you a breakdown of the agenda, we'll start off with an introduction and a recap of the project overview, followed by a review from the first public consultation, which was held in July 2021. Then we will follow this with a summary of the baseline studies and the environmental impact assessment, then followed by a highlight of the anticipated significant impacts and proposed mitigation measures, the management monitoring plans, as well as the grievance redress plan. Finally, we'll close off with a summary and closing remarks, and we will follow this with a question and answer session where you're welcome to send in your feedback via the chat or by telephone. So at this time, I want to hand over to Mr. Devon Rampersad of NIDCO to give an introduction and project overview.
Thank you, Shazara. Good afternoon, everyone. So just to do a quick review of the project description, the government of Trinidad and Tobago did, through the Ministry of Works, a desirous of constructing a modern offshore fishing facility at Moruga. As we would have discussed in the previous consultation, Moruga has been identified as one of the main fishing villages, the main fishing communities in Trinidad, and therefore it is important that a major fishing facility is developed in the community. So going through the project, the proposed project area is shown in the slide, and you can see project area is approximately 18 hectares, and it's located just west of the existing Gran Chemin fishing facility of Laloon Road. The offshore facility, the objectives of this facility would be firstly to create a modern fishing facility which satisfies the demands of the fishing industry in Moruga, to also create a facility that can accommodate the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard. And overall, the objective of the project is to encourage economic development in Moruga that would provide tangible benefits to the community. Right. Just to give an overview of the facility, what it would include, the facility would be able to accommodate the offloading of fish catch by 10 vessels simultaneously. In addition, it would be able to accommodate the repairs to boats, the engines, the general vessel, the physical repairs such as the fiberglass and those type of things, as well as net repairs. In addition, the facility would include a fuel pump station to supply fuel for fishing pirogues, and it would be able to accommodate two 50-meter long Coast Guard vessels. To support that, a dredge channel and a turning basin would be established and maintained during operations to provide access to the Coast Guard vessels, and there would be accommodation for a safe accommodation for approximately 150 fishing pirogues as 10 larger fishing vessels. So going on now to the updates from the last consultation to now, we would have had some changes to the design. Right. Firstly, the service wharves, which we would have indicated previously would have been supported on a reclamation fill. This area would be supported by a pile foundation. Initially, the plan would have been for the dredge material that would have been gathered for establishing the approach channel would have been used as reclamation fill. However, we have now altered the design of it, where that dredge material will be disposed at an approved site offshore. An application has been made to identify that site to the Commission of State Lands, who would give us an approved disposal site for the project. In addition, we also now have included a dredge area along the approach trestle, This would be to ensure that the construction equipment and the support vessels can access this area for construction. Upon completion of that construction works along the trestle, the area would be replenished with suitable material. So looking at the main pre-construction activities on the onshore area of the project. So this area highlighted in red, the red box, sorry, that area would be the location of the main pre-construction where the activities would take place prior to the main construction works. These works would include the establishment of an access road, which would be approximately 200 meters long south of Laloon Road and approximately 6 meters wide. That would provide the main access from the existing road network to the project facility. In addition, that area, an area for the contractor's yard, will be established, and on that area, the main aspects of work and the main facilities on that contractor's yard would include a temporary concrete plant, stockpile areas, as well as the contractor's office facilities to support their workers and supervisory staff, as well as parking and whatever associated site works and drainage works to facilitate the site laydown area. Going on to the construction activities offshore, the main construction activities offshore would include, as I would have mentioned before, the dredging of an approach channel and a turning basin. This approach channel will be dredged to a maximum depth of 5 meters. As well, we'd have a dredge channel along the approach trestle. This would be this area in orange. That area would be dredged to a depth of approximately 2 meters to accommodate construction equipment. And as I mentioned before, this is temporary. This area will be dredged temporarily and reinstated upon completion of construction. The dredge material that would have been gathered during construction, that would be disposed of at an approved disposal site. Another one of the key aspects of works would be the construction of a rock causeway. That's the area labeled number 1. That's the first section of the access to the facility. This would be a causeway that would be built on an earthen causeway or established using rocks. And thereafter, that orange section would be in a piled approach trestle, which would continue the access to the main offshore facility. In addition, as we would have discussed a lot of this in the previous public consultation, but the facility would be protected by a vertical breakwater structure or wave barrier. That's the areas highlighted as number 9 and 10. This provides a sheltered area for the rest of the facility. And we also have the establishment of the infrastructure works such as drainage, fuel, utilities, and other ancillary works. Going on to the next slide, we look at the construction activities and equipment. So we have the main construction activities to be undertaken. One of the main activities is dredging. So the dredging of the approach channel and the turning basin would take place over an area of approximately 17,500 square meters. The maximum dredge depth would be 5 meters, and that's for the approach trestle, for the approach causeway, sorry. And then to a depth of 2 meters along to provide access for the construction equipment. The proposed dredger to be used would be a cutter suction dredger, and that's shown in the diagram. In addition to that, we'd have other vessels to support the construction work, such as barges and multi-purpose workboats. So these barges and workboats, they would be supplying the equipment, the construction material to the project site, as well as supporting whatever piling activities that has to be taken. The pile rigs and those things would be done off these barges. Right, so going on to the main timeline of events or the expected project schedule, we are currently in 2022, where we are at where we are having the 2nd public consultation. We anticipate in this quarter we would submit the AIA, and we'd complete the EIA and submit. Once it's submitted to the EMA would review, and within 80 working days, they would provide feedback. It may be a CEC, or they would request further information. So we anticipate that we will have the CEC for the project before the end of 2022, by the fourth quarter of 2022. In 2023, we are hopeful to commence construction works, and we'll start first by mobilizing, setting up the contractor's yard, establishing the access road to the facility in the first quarter. In the second quarter of next year, we would hope to have the dredging works being undertaken for both the approach channel as well as along the approach trestle. And then in the second half of 2023, we begin construction works of the approach trestle. In 2024, we move on now to the main offshore facility, which would include the structured service wharfs, as well as the Coast Guard jetty. And then by the end of the year, we'd have the structured wave barrier jetty and the finger piers for the facility completed. So we anticipate that we'll have most of the construction works completed in 2024. In 2025, we would finalize the facility by establishing the associated infrastructure, such as the drainage, the fuel lines, the electrical lines, the water lines, and by mid-2025, we'll be able to demobilize and complete the project. I would now hand you over to Deja, who would give us some feedback from the first virtual public consultation and take us further along the presentation.
So thank you very much, Devon, and good afternoon to everyone who are joining us today. I will now summarize the feedback that was received from the first public consultation, which would have been hosted virtually on the 29th of July, 2021. So several issues and concerns would have been highlighted during and after the first public consultation, as well as from focus group meetings, letters that were received, and as well as feedback forms. A summary document was therefore disseminated electronically to those who registered for the public consultation event, and also copies would have been delivered to relevant stakeholders within the Moruga community. And just to note as well that this summary document is also posted on NIDCO's Facebook page, and it really includes responses to the following main topics. So concerns with regards to the project site, safety and impacts, stakeholder engagement, amenities, management and operation of the facility, land and other facility uses, community services and development, employment, and the EIA report. It is to be noted that this feedback is being taken into consideration, and the final feedback will be incorporated in the EIA. Next slide, please. So now I will move on to the environmental impact assessment process. This slide basically gives a summary of the EIA process, how the EIA is structured, and the EIA really aims to assess the associated risk as well as hazards with all aspects of the proposed project, and also address the management or mitigation of any identified negative environmental or socioeconomic impacts. This slide shows briefly step 1 as the first step of the EIA being describing the project. So as Devon would have previously mentioned, all the details on the project activities as well as equipment, material and labor that would form part of the project. Then we move on to step 2, which is really understanding what the environment is. So understanding the environment, we would have considered the different components of the environment being the biological, physical, and socioeconomic environments. Then we proceed to step 3, which is really to determine how the construction and operation may affect this environment that we would have defined in step 2. So we identify all the impacts and rank them in terms of probability and consequence. We have also conducted modeling studies to determine what potential impacts will be, and I'll get into that further in the presentation. And then finally, step 4 is really reducing the impact and the associated risks. So we identify means of reducing any impacts that are identified to the lowest practical level, and also proposing monitoring and management plans. Next slide. So how do we go about understanding the baseline environment? So this slide gives a snapshot of the main things that Coastal Dynamics Limited would have conducted in order to gain data as well as information of the project area. So we'd have conducted baseline studies of the physical, biological, and socioeconomic environment between 2016, 2017, and 2021. We would have done multiple engagements with relevant government entities, stakeholders, and fisherfolk, including focus group meetings. As previously mentioned, we had the first public consultation in July of 2021, and we would have also done literature review and historical data sets, and gathered, historical data sets that were relevant to the project area. Next slide. So going further into how we define the project area for this particular proposed development, we look at a near field and a far field area. So we define the near field area as the area that really encompasses the offshore boundaries included in the data collection, as well as the modeling studies as shown on the map to the left. Near field area also includes the Moruga village, which is most likely to be directly impacted by the proposed development. And looking at the map on the right, the far field area really encompasses the offshore boundaries along the southern coast of Trinidad. So that is from Icacos to Guaybarari to the east. And this area includes all the community districts in the Moruga region. So I will now go into the baseline study to describe the biological environment. So in order to collect data, we would have done several biological surveys in 2016, 2017, and 2021 along the Moruga shoreline and in the near field marine area as shown in the map on the right. So discussing the Benthic community, these are the communities that live in or on the seafloor, and they play an essential role in bioturbation activity and is a significant dietary component for many fish. So we would have identified that there were 8 major taxonomic groups that were found in the Moruga Bay, and we noted that the total recovery of the benthic macrofauna was poor, with the most abundant species being the shovelhead worms or polychaetes, which are a type of marine worm as shown in the images at the bottom of this slide. So moving on to avifauna, or looking at the birds within the study area. So the Victoria Mayaro Forest Reserve important bird area is the closest of the proposed areas to the study site. And during recent surveys, which would have been done in 2017, the black vultures were the most abundant species in both dry and wet season. And it is noted that none of the species that were recorded are considered rare, endangered, or vulnerable. We should know that sensitive species such as the pawi, as well as the scarlet ibis, may be found in nearby areas. But the pawi may still be absent from the study area, or it is highly unlikely. The scarlet ibis is also known to dwell in small populations in mangrove swamps and has been sighted approximately 0.25 kilometers away from the immediate study area of Moruga in May 2020. The scarlet ibis has also been recorded on mangrove wetlands within the wider South Coast study area, which has been sighted 50.74 kilometers from the direct study area. And although potentially present in nearby mangrove areas, it is not a major breeding and foraging ground, and therefore these birds are considered to fly away to more suitable areas if they are disturbed. So the scarlet ibis is possibly the only terrestrial sensitive species that can come into close contact with the project activities. But Moruga is already considered developed, so these birds will not only fly away if disturbed, but usually stick to the mangrove areas. Next slide. So I'll now go into the aquatic fauna. So the main target species of the surface fisheries are the carite, Spanish mackerel, kingfish, as well as several species of sharks, according to Fisheries Division Statistics 2010 to 2016. And within the sampling period of our survey in 2016 to 2017, The most abundant species that was recorded would have been the croakers in the wet season, as well as the grunts and the snappers in the dry season. So the graph to the right shows that the white-mouthed croaker and the carrots represent the highest weight landed, while the carrot and kingfish represented the highest values in the Carcass Teguia area. And there has been no difference in crustacean distribution as seen between both dry and wet season during surveys conducted. Next slide. So moving on to marine mammals and sea turtles. So while the south coast of Trinidad has not been identified as nesting habitat for sea turtle nesting may occur infrequently on the southern coast of Trinidad. So the green and hawksbill and maybe loggerhead and olive ridley turtles may forage in nearshore habitats around the coast. So for example, a dead juvenile green turtle would have been discovered on the shore at Landsmitan, Moruga, between the Morukit and Moruga rivers in a survey conducted in December of 2016. So overall, the study area may be within the feeding and migratory routes for some marine mammals, which have been reported elsewhere in Trinidad and Tobago. Next slide. So in terms of sensitive habitats, the Trinity Hills Game Sanctuary, which is found within the Victoria Mayaro Forest Reserve, represents the closest protected area to the project activities. And within the immediate study area, fragmented mangroves are present just east of the existing fishing facility. There is an absence of seagrasses within the study area. However, macroalgae species are present. And these are based on surveys that were conducted in 2007-2017. And of the existing designated environmentally sensitive areas found in Trinidad, none are found within or close to the proposed Moruga fishing port area, nor will it be impacted by the proposed project activities. The Trinity Hill Game Sanctuary is also home to a variety of important wildlife, which include the ocelots. And also to note as well that there is an absence of any coral reef or hard rock bottom areas offshore Moruga. Next slide. So moving on to the coastal vegetation that would have been observed during a survey that was conducted in 2021. The typical trees that would have been noted would have included sea grapes, as well as seaside maho, airy cowpea, as well as coconut palm, as shown on the screen. Next slide. So I'll now go into describing the socio-economic environment for the study area. So the study area really consists of 7 community districts as defined by the CSO 2011 Population and Housing Census, as shown on the map to the right. The immediate study area concentrated particularly on Moruga Village, which is the community that we believe would be in closest proximity and be directly impacted by the proposed development. And this is shown on the map to the left, delineated in red. And the wider study area encompassed the nearby communities of Larufin, Laloon, Borjaja, La Savane, Marak, and Bassitia. And the total population in the area is a little under 7,000 persons, with approximately 2,000 households according to the last census. The entire study area is characterized by a relatively young but low population density, where Moruga Village is least populated when compared to nearby communities in the wider study area. Next slide. So this slide just gives a brief of the socioeconomic characteristics in the area. So we would have collected data from primary as well as secondary sources to define the socioeconomic environment. And within the EIA report, the baseline conditions would have included demography, economic activity, fisheries, land and resource use, physical infrastructure, employment and labor market, emergency services, archaeological or cultural resources, onshore and marine traffic, community concerns, aspirations and attitudes were described. And here we present some of the findings from that study that we would have done. So in terms of road infrastructure, we know that all roads are dual carriageway asphalt roads, In fair condition, however, there are sections which are in need of repair. So currently there are road rehabilitation works that are being undertaken by the Ministry of Works and Transport. And then in terms of utilities, water is obtained from several sources, including the Water and Sewage Authority, truck-borne water from the Princestown Regional Corporation, as well as from private catchments. Its inconsistent supply, however, and poor quality is a major challenge faced by the community. And electrical supply is reliable and consistent. Telephone and internet networks are available for use. However, some areas of household have challenges, and the public and private institutions provide the community with access to computer, and internet use to those who are in need. And lastly, with regards to emergency services, so there is the Moruga Police Station and the Moruga Health Center available. There is no 24/7 emergency care, and emergency care at the health center and fire station is not available within close proximity to the Moruga village. And in terms of other services, governmental and social services are deficient within the study area, and these must be sought via commute to Princestown. Banking and ATM services are also not available, along with the need to upgrade the fuel capacity at Gran Chemin gas station, whose supply becomes sold out very quickly, forcing fisherfolk and the community to go further away for fuel supply. In terms of the marine traffic, all marine traffic is expected to be from local fishing vessels and pleasure crafts. So CDL would have made consultations with the Maritime Services Division and Ministry of Trade and Industry for information on shipping activities. And the precise shipping routes taken by vessels in Trinidad waters is not known. However, data for last port of call between 2016 to 2020 for the southernmost ports of Trinidad was used in the analysis. And the data showed that the marine traffic generated at these ports will pose no direct threats to the project activities near the study area. And the route shown in the figure on the left, on the map to the left, indicate that the current routes chosen by vessels are not within direct proximity to the project area in Moruga. In addition, no commercial or industrial vessels have been recorded as entering the Moruga area, and all marine traffic is essentially will focus on the local fishing vessel and pleasure crafts. And the map to the right just gives a brief in terms of two stations where land-based traffic was analyzed, and this was done in 2017. And those results shows that overall the traffic in the area is generally light. However, there is an increase in traffic during the morning between 8 to 9, at noon, 12 to 1, as well as in the afternoon, 6 to 7 p.m. And on the weekends, there are two peaks in the traffic. So between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., and secondly, between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., which corresponds to travel patterns of beachgoers. So the road traffic is primarily from passengers' cars, as well as buses, trucks, motorcycles, utilizing the Moruga Road. Next slide. So in terms of the fishing activities, so according to the Fisheries Division 2018-2019, as well as the 2020 vessel census, Gran Chemin and Larafin are the major hub for fishing activity in Moruga. In 2018 and 2019, there were 50 vessels registered for this landing site, with approximately 100 fisherfolk, whereas in 2020, there were 38 vessels and 76 fisherfolk, indicating that not all fisherfolk operate their own vessels. Additionally, at Larafin, 65 vessels were registered with approximately 130 fisherfolk in 2018 and 2019, and 55 vessels and 110 fisherfolk in 2020. And there are 8 fishing depots within the study area from Carcass to Guayagorari, as indicated in the map on the right, top right. And the vessels operating out of all sites in this region operate during the daytime and nighttime, depending on the gear type being employed. So they are generally 18 feet to 29 feet in length and powered by outboard engines. The vessels also operate throughout the year on the south coast using a range of fishing methods, including gill netting, line fishing, fish potting, and seine. and a summary of the fish landing and its values provided by the Fisheries Division for 2010 to 2016 is shown in the graph that you see at the bottom left. Next slide. And in terms of the archaeological or the cultural features in the area, so we know that the area is rich in cultural and historical, religious and natural features. There are indigenous communities, including the Americans as well as the First Peoples, and the festivities of interest would really be the Discovery Day as well as St. Peter's celebration, amongst others. So historically significant structures include, but are not limited to, the Moruga Museum and the Cocoa and Chocolate Museum. And archaeological sites, as listed by the National Trust, are located more than 1 kilometer away from the project location and therefore not considered to be impacted by the project. So I'll now proceed into the physical environment in terms of the baseline studies that were conducted. Next slide. So this map on your right just gives an overview of all the sampling points that we would have collected specific data, as well as you would see the contour lines included from the bathymetric survey. So from literature review, we know that the Trinidad and Tobago climate really experiences a dry season from January to May and a wet season during June to December. And late May and December are considered as transitional periods to the wet and dry seasons, respectively. The dry season is characterized by moderate to strong low-level winds, warm days, and cool nights, and the wet season is characterized by longer wind speeds compared to the dry season, where there are hot and humid days and nights, and a significant increase in rainfall. So the winds are generally between the northeast and southeast directions. So CDL would have collected we would have collected data from a weather station that was installed in Moruga in October 2021, and the results showed stronger winds from the southeast direction occurring mainly during the day, as well as northeast winds were observed during the night, with a mean wave speed measured as 2.6 meters per second. As shown on the map to the right, data was also collected for air noise, water sediments, as well as beach profiles in 2016, 2017, and 2021. So these would have been collected during the wet and dry seasons, and these will be presented in the following slides. So an ambient air quality was conducted for 24 hours at 4 stations in 2016, 2017, and 2021, as shown in the map on the left. So ozone, nitrogen dioxide, as well as sulfur dioxide were below the detectable limits. And it is noted that the parameters were found to be within the EMA's Air Pollution Rules Schedule 1 maximum permissible limits, as shown in the results. Additionally, the ambient noise survey was conducted for 24 hours at 4 stations in 2016, 2017, and 2021. So this is included on the map to the right. And based on the results shown on this slide, the stations were within the prescribed standards outlined in the EMA's noise pollution control rules for Zone 3 general areas. Next slide. Water quality parameters were measured for 4 freshwater samples collected in the Moruga River, the Moruga River, as well as the Benthic River, which are located in close proximity of the project site. And all nutrients and organic matters were all within local EMA Water Pollution Rules 2019 and the international guidelines. So all other trace or heavy metals were within local and international guidelines. Temperature, dissolved oxygen were also within the recommended values for the EMA Schedule 3 Water Pollution Rules 2019. And we also know that the total suspended solids exceeded EMA's water pollution rules at the Moruga River in the dry season survey, mainly due to heavy rainfall at the time of sampling. Total copper exceeded EMA's water pollution rules guidelines at Moruga, Moruga, and Benthic rivers, and total iron exceeded EMA's water pollution rules as well as CCME guidelines at Moruga, Moruga, and the Benthic rivers. The pH, which recorded slightly lower values in August 2021, is likely due to the stagnant and low water levels that were present at the time of sampling. So the map to the right just gives a snapshot in terms of the areas where the data was collected, pictures from those sample surveys, as well as the results. Next slide. So marine quality data was measured at 9 sampling stations within the Moruga Bay. pH, temperature, and dissolved oxygen were within the recommended values of the EMA Schedule 3 Water Pollution Rules 2019 for marine environments. The total suspended solids exceeded EMA's water pollution rules at most stations in both seasons surveyed due to heavy rainfall at the time of sampling. No acute toxic effect was determined for any of the stations in both seasons. And all trace metals, organics, and nutrients levels were within local EMA Water Pollution Rules 2019 and international US EPA guideline values. So the map to the right just shows the sampling points where marine water quality would have been measured, and the table at the bottom also presents the results. Next slide. So sediment samples were also collected at 9 marine stations, and overall the stations were classified as silty sand with low percentages of clay in all sampling events. So most organics showed seasonal variation with higher levels observed in the dry season, and TPH and TOG levels were observed to be significantly higher than the 2016-2017 data. Analysis of LC50 acute toxicity showed that there was no acute toxic effect in sediment at all the stations in both the dry and wet season surveys. All trace metals were within international guideline limits, meaning those guidelines from the Canadian and Australian. Next slide. So we would have also collected data at the proposed dredge channel. So no acute toxic effects were detected in any of the sampling stations. Organic parameter levels at the sediment stations were below their respective laboratory detection limits, and all trace metals were within international guideline limits. So at all stations, we know that pollution levels of concern were not detected. And it is to be noted as well that in 3 of the sample locations, we did borehole samples within that proposed dredge channel. So I will now hand you over to Medina, who will present the oceanography of the baseline environment.
So physical oceanography describes the physical properties and dynamics of the ocean environment, which includes, but is not limited to, currents and waves. In order to describe the oceanographic conditions for Moruga, CDL collected waves and currents within the nearshore and offshore area. The average significant wave heights offshore were 0.8 meters, while nearshore it was 0.6 meters. Waves were predominantly from the southeast, as you can see from the wave rose plots to the right of the screen. The nearshore is above and the offshore is below. These help us visualize the waves in the study area as it shows the predominant wave direction with wave height. It also reflects the turning of the waves as they approach the nearshore area. The video shown above is a simulation of the wave height and direction over a few days in January using DHI's Mike 21 spectral waves model. The model allows us to investigate the propagation of waves into the study area. Offshore waves, winds, water levels, and a list of other calibration factors were used in the setup. Once the model was calibrated, a year-long production run was done in order to capture seasonal variations. The output of this is used to evaluate the natural sediment dynamics over a year. And the next slide, we look at the currents. Next slide, please. So offshore and nearshore currents were measured at different depths throughout the water column: nearbed, mid-level, and surface. So current roses on the right of the screen show the nearshore current speed and directions at these 3 levels. Nearshore surface currents were less than 0.8 meters per second with a vector mean of 0.07 meters per second. Nearshore, the current directions are influenced by the tides, where during the rising tide, current flow is generally toward the west or northwest, and during falling tide, it was towards the east or southeast. Understanding the currents in the area will help us predict the impact of the project on the flow patterns there and potentially determine the likely path that pollutants, for example, accidental diesel spills, will go. To do this, a model was also set up to replicate the baseline currents. The Mike 21 hydrodynamic model developed by DHI was used. The inputs include offshore currents, water levels, winds, and other calibration factors. The map shown above is the mean depth average, current speed, and direction before the structure is put into place. You can see the net west-northwest flow evident. Similarly to the waves, once the model was calibrated, seasonal baseline conditions were established. I will now hand you over to Jade, who will go through beach profiles for the study area. Thank you.
Thanks, Medina. A total of 8 beach profiles were surveyed during April 2021 and August 2021. The location of these profiles are shown in the map to the top right of the slide. Profiles surveyed during April 2021, those are represented in blue, show the winter and dry season conditions when wave energy is typically high and river discharge is low. Profiles surveyed during August 2021, shown as orange, represent the calmer summer period and wet season conditions. Beach profile plots for Profile 2 and 3 are shown. Profile 3 is located immediately east of the proposed works, while Profile 4 is located immediately west. Distances from the benchmark are shown on the x-axis, while elevations with respect to mean sea level are shown on the y-axis. When comparing the April 2021 and August 2021 surveys at Profile 3, there is a noticeable buildup of sediment in the upper profile. This accumulation of sediment is likely due to the low river discharge from the nearby rivers during the dry season. When comparing the April 2021 and August 2021 surveys at Profile 4, there are lower profile elevations in the upper portion of the profile during April 2021. Lower profile elevations are typical for winter profiles, as during the winter period, higher wave energy results in the removal of sediment from the nearshore zone. It can be observed that during August 2021, the sediment in the upper profile is replenished as wave energy reduces. I'll now go on to the next slide where I'll discuss littoral drift modeling for baseline conditions. The beach profiles we use as an input into this model. Littoral drift modeling was conducted using baseline data to understand the sediment dynamics within the study area. A total of 10 cross-shore profiles were modeled, and these are represented by the lines running perpendicular to the shoreline. Some of these profile locations overlap with the measured beach profiles that was just presented in the previous slide. The blue arrows represent the predominant direction of sediment transport, and the associated red numbers just below the arrows represent the annual accumulated net drift. The annual accumulated net drift is the total volume of sediment being transported from that profile annually. Based on the littoral drift modeling, sediment transport is predominantly towards the west. The potential for sediment transport is highest at LD2 and LD3, which are located immediately east of the proposed works. This portion of the shoreline is furthest from equilibrium orientation, and therefore changes to the shoreline are expected as the shoreline rotates in order to attain equilibrium. The potential for sediment transport is lowest at LD6, which indicates that this portion of the shoreline is most closely aligned to the baseline wave environment. The yellow areas along the cross-shore profiles represent the annual net drift, which is typically used to identify the width of the littoral zone. The littoral zone is the location in which longshore sediment transport is occurring. With respect to the littoral zone, it is important to note that the littoral zone at LD3 is narrow, with maximum sediment transport occurring near to the shoreline. I will now hand you over to Deja, who will present the impact assessment.
Thanks, Jade. So I will now proceed to step 3, which is the impact assessment methodology. So the impact assessment really includes those potential impacts to the environment that may result from the routine planned activities as well as some accidental events. And the environmental receptors that may be impacted are categorized as biological, physical, as well as social, as outlined in the table to the right on the slide. And after we identify the potential impacts, the impact analysis is conducted by calculating the risk factor for a particular impact. And the risk is often expressed in terms of a combination of the consequences or the severity of an event, as well as the associated likelihood of occurrence, which we call the probability. And this is described by the ISO standards. So therefore, the impact risk factor is determined by using a formula at the bottom of this slide, which we use, which is probability multiplied by potential severity. Next slide. So the initial rankings that are applied to all activities are usually before mitigation. And they are based on the absence of any controls currently recognized as industry standards for coastal protection structures as well as other coastal development activities. And the after mitigation rankings really refer to the application of legislation, current industry standards, as well as best practices by NIDCO and its contractors for the proposed project. So the table on the left outlines the impact assessment ranking values and categories for negative impacts. So we know that the red ranking value of 12 to 16 and orange or ranking of 8 to 9 are what we consider as significant impacts, whereas the yellow ranking of 3 to 6 and green ranking of 1 to 2 represent impacts with decreasing risk significance. Impacts rated as serious and major are priorities for mitigation, and though the mitigation can also be considered for some less significant impacts, for example, those that are ranked as moderate and low, to further reduce the probability or severity of those impacts. The table on the right outlines the impact assessment ranking values and categories for positive impacts, because there may be positive impacts associated with a particular project. Ranking values of 12 to 16, as well as 8 to 9, are considered as highly beneficial and beneficial, and those are usually recommended. Ranking values of 3 to 6 and 1 to 2 represent impacts with decreasing positive significance. So I'll now go into further detail in terms of defining what are the probabilities as well as the severity. So the probability or likelihood that a specific impact outcome will occur is rated using the categories in the table shown on this slide. A scale of 1 to 4 is used, whereby a value of 1 is considered as low probability, whereby the impact may occur under exceptional circumstances. Ranking values increase from 2 to 4, whereby the 4 is a certain probability, where the impact will definitely occur due to an activity. So the consequence or severity of each potential impact outcome is evaluated, taking into account the nature of the impact, including the extent and the duration, and rated using the definitions which are shown. We understand that it is hard to quantify a person's perceptions, emotions, and feelings about the impact a project may have on an individual. Therefore, the physical and biological impact, which is the table to the left, is defined separately for the social environment, which is shown in the table to the right. The severity is listed as positive or negative, depending on the type of impact to the environment. And both tables show that the severity of an impact is ranked on a scale from 1, which is considered negligible, and increases to a value of 4, which is considered major. And the description for the severity of the impact differs. For example, a major severity on the physical, biological environment in regional or widespread changes with severe alterations to the sensitive habitats or severe impacts to populations of sensitive species. Conversely, a major severity on the social environment results in permanent resource use change or an activity that is likely to cause a permanent change in community social and cultural interactions. So in this presentation, we will focus on the main modeling studies that were conducted as well as impacts that are deemed as significant on the physical, biological, and social environment. The proposed mitigation measures presented today are not exhaustive, and the feedback from stakeholder engagements will be considered. It should also be noted that the full details of the impact assessment will form part of the EIA report. So I will now invite Jade again to go through the littoral drift modeling studies conducted.
To determine the impacts of the proposed works on the sediment dynamics within the study area, littoral drift modeling was conducted using the wave conditions representative of the operational wave conditions after the completion of all the proposed works. The baseline littoral drift results were then compared to operational results to deduce the impacts during the construction phase of the project and the operational phase of the project. The map presented in this slide highlights the potential erosion and accretion expected during the construction phase of this project based on the alterations to the baseline sediment dynamics. The yellow region between LD2 and LD3 indicate that no significant erosion or accretion is likely to occur in this area. However, during the initial phase of construction, it is expected that the causeway will disrupt most of the littoral zone at LD3, blocking the point of maximum sediment transport. This will result in an accumulation of sediment immediately east of the causeway, as indicated by the green region between LD3 and the causeway. The blockage of sediment by the causeway will lead to the reduction of sediment supply to the downdrift region, resulting in potential erosion. In the map, the areas of potential downdrift erosion are indicated as red regions to the west of the causeway. Once the causeway is completed and the dredging of the offshore channel begins, changes to the wave direction are expected, and the impacts will be similar to those expected during the operational phase of the project. I will now go through the impacts expected during the operational phase of the project in the next slide. During the operational phase, the direction of sediment transport at LD2 and LD3 remains unchanged and continues towards the west. Therefore, the accumulation of sediment immediately east of the structure will likely continue during the operational phase. This is indicated by the green region between LD3 and the causeway. Eventually, the accumulation of sediment will surpass the length of the causeway, allowing some sediment to bypass the structure. At LD4 and LD5, there is an alteration to direction of wave approach during the operational phase due to the offshore dredge channel. This changes the predominant direction of sediment transport from the west to the east. Therefore, during the operational phase, sediment from LD4 and LD5 will move towards the structure, resulting in potential accretion immediately west of the structure, and this is indicated by the green area between the causeway and LD4. As there are significant changes to the wave approach, the shoreline will rotate to attain equilibrium with the operational wave environment, which can lead to the potential erosion between LD4 and LD5. Between LD5 and LD6, there is also the potential for erosion, as there is a divergence of sediment transport in that region. This means that sediment will likely be moving out of the area that is west at LD5 and east at LD6, with no sediment moving towards the area to replenish it. The next slide will it shows a summary of the impacts. So as discussed in the previous slides, there is the potential for erosion during both construction and operational phase. During both phases, the likelihood of erosion is high, with an expected major severity. However, the CZMP and SMMP will allow for the monitoring of the shoreline, which will indicate if any significant erosion is occurring. This will then trigger an intervention measure, which will reduce the severity of erosion from major to moderate, as identified in the table. I will now hand you over to Medina, who will discuss the spectral wave modeling.
As mentioned previously, the measured data sets were used to calibrate and validate the local wave and hydrodynamic models. We're actually kind of taking a step back and looking at the waves to understand the impacts that Jade has just discussed. The modeled waves with the structure and the dredge channel are in place and are shown in this image. This represents the average wave height and directions over a year. You can see that offshore, the waves are still from the southeast, as we saw in the baseline. The waves then diffract around the proposed structure and channel, and you can see the change in direction and energy related to the wave height in the lee of the structure. In other words, the presence of the structure acts to reduce the wave energy in the study area. We can see generally the color changes from green and yellow before the structure, indicating a range of approximately 0.4 to 0.6 meters, to a dark blue purple, indicating a range of approximately 0.05 to 0.2 meters. In the next slide, we'll be looking at the change in currents with the structures. So a similar approach was taken when examining the changes in currents before and after the proposed structure and dredge channel. In general, the currents appear to have undergone a small reduction in flow rates and a change in direction occurring within the proposed offshore fishing facility. Generally, the mean currents reduced from 0.08 meters per second to 0.02 meters per second. In the lee of the turning basin, mean currents decreased from 0.07 meter per second to 0.03 meter per second. The effect of the proposed development on the currents will be confined to the immediate regions along the infrastructure. However, the flow will be similar to the baseline conditions elsewhere. Looking at the impacts table, the purpose of the port is to create a safe and calm environment for vessels to berth. The modeling study shows that the structures during the operational phase will reduce the wave energy in the immediate vicinity of the port structures, aligning with its function. As mentioned previously, the impacts are highly beneficial from this aspect and therefore was given a rank of positive 12. As such, no mitigation measures were included. Looking at oil spill modeling now, an accidental and hypothetical oil spill from a vessel was simulated using model currents and the MiG-21 oil spill module to determine possible pathways or movements of accidental spills. This was done to consider the social and biological impacts to the community and environment. Here we are looking at a hypothetical, relatively large, 173 cubic meter diesel spill that occurred from a vessel within the study area. The diesel spill reaches Moruga's coastline within the hour, which is expected given how close it occurred to the shoreline. The spill travels west under the influence of the winds and surface currents, and after 12 hours, it becomes beach between Mont Diablo and Moruga. Diesel is generally very volatile and will evaporate and disperse in the environment, especially in small volumes, so a larger spill was used as a worst-case scenario to track the pathway over time. The next couple of slides show the pathway of the spill. We also looked at dispersion modeling or particle tracking to capture the fate of sediments released into the environment from the dredging works. Modeling was conducted using DHI's MiG-21 particle transport module software. It was developed for this purpose. The currents previously discussed were used in the dispersion study as well. It is proposed that the approach channel and turning basin and the trestle area will be dredged using a cutter suction dredger. An image of this dredger is shown at the base of this map. The plume source or sediment source of the cutter suction dredger is the rotating cutter head, shown in the figure by the orange swirly arrow. Generally, the suspended sediment is generated close to the bed and a large portion will stay low in the water column and settle near to the dredger. That's according to Becker et al., but we also saw that in the modeling studies as well. The map shows the average suspended mud concentrations exceeding 20 milligram per liter. The concentrations were generally above 80 milligram per liter, indicated by the green and red areas. However, these were generally confined to the proposed dredged areas. I'll now hand you over to Deja, who will continue the impacts on the physical environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Medina. So I'll continue with the significant impacts to the physical environment, where we estimate that there would be emissions that are likely to be generated as a result of transportation of materials and machinery, on-site vehicular activity, as well as marine vessel activities, amongst others. And in addition to the gaseous emissions of nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and carbon monoxide, it is expected that there will be an increase in dust particulates in the area. So as shown on the table on this slide, the receptors of the Moruga Road community are expected to be significantly impacted by emissions during the construction activities. And therefore, this impact was assigned an impact risk factor of -12, which is considered major. A negative descriptor means that this is deemed a negative impact. And with mitigation measures such as maintenance of equipment, covered and secured backfill loads, side barriers, turning off equipment when not in use, as well as implementation of speed limits, it is anticipated that the probability of the impact will decrease. Therefore, after mitigation, the impact risk factor has reduced to -9, which is considered to be serious. Secondly, the receptors of the Larufin and Laloon Road communities are expected to be significantly impacted by emissions during the construction activities, and therefore this impact was assigned an impact risk factor value of -12, which is considered major. With mitigation measures, as discussed previously and included on the slide, it is anticipated that the probability and potential severity of the impact will decrease. Therefore, after mitigation, the impact risk factor reduces to -4, which is considered to be moderate. And thirdly, the receptors of the Moruga Road community are expected to be significantly impacted by emissions during the operation phase. And therefore, this impact was assigned an impact risk factor value of -12, which is considered to be major. With mitigation measures such as maintenance of vessel engines and an emission management plan, it is anticipated that the probability and likelihood of this impact will decrease. And therefore, after mitigation, the impact risk factor reduces to -4, which is considered to be moderate. Next slide. So we look at the impacts to the ambient noise quality. And noise may be generated by the proposed project activities, which could increase ambient noise levels at the site as well as along the access routes. The transportation of equipment and machinery via haulage trucks can potentially increase ambient noise levels that may negatively affect the community in the vicinity of the emission source. And as shown on the table on this slide, the receptors of the onshore area are expected to be significantly impacted by noise during the construction activities, and therefore this impact was assigned an impact risk factor value of -9, which is considered serious. A negative descriptor, again, means that this is deemed as a negative impact. With the mitigation measures, such as use of noise-reducing mechanisms for engines, some activities restricted to daytime only to the extent possible, maintenance of equipment, side barriers, and implementation of speed limits, it is anticipated that the potential severity of the impact will decrease. And therefore, after mitigation, the impact risk factor reduces to -6, which is considered to be moderate. Secondly, the receptor of the offshore area is expected to be significantly impacted by noise generated by the dredger and other piling activities during the construction phase. Therefore, this impact was assigned an impact risk factor of -9, which is considered serious, with mitigation measures including ensuring that marine users are a safe distance away, as well as placing of dampers and cushions between the pile and the hammer. It is anticipated that the probability and the potential severity of the impact will decrease. Therefore, after mitigation, the impact risk factor reduces to -4, which is considered to be moderate. So I will now proceed into identifying the major impacts that were identified on the biological environment. So in terms of the major impacts we anticipate would be to the Benthic communities. The dredging really involves the removal of sediment material from the seafloor. So therefore, the impact on the Benthic macrofauna is expected to have a very high likelihood. The impact is considered to have a moderate potential severity, resulting in local on-site environmental changes. And this results in a significant impact risk factor ranking of -12, which are for the removal of benthic communities, and also the increase in sedimentation and smothering of benthic organisms during construction and removal of benthic communities during the maintenance dredging activities. So in terms of analyzing and ranking this, we consider that there would be a short-term loss of the benthic organisms due to dredging that cannot be fully mitigated. However, dredging in the designated area will ensure the impact is confined to that particular area. And other mitigation measures include a vessel track on the dredger to ensure that the dredging occurs in approved areas, maintenance of the dredger, as well as the use of silt traps. So even after mitigation, the impact risk factor remains as -12, as there is no change to the high probability and potential severity. Next slide. So I'll now proceed to the impact analysis on the socio-economic environment. So I will now present a few of the social impacts identified. Please be reminded that these are not all the impacts that have been identified by the team, but present those that are more significant or noticeable. So given that the commercial marine traffic within the Moruga Bay is negligible and limited to fishing activity, the Moruga offshore fishing port project activities will mainly have impact on the interactions with the fishing vessels. So the major impacts will be felt within the nearshore area, and discussions held with the fishing community indicated that while the major fishing activity occurs outside of the nearshore area, some fishing vessels also utilize these areas to conduct seine and gill netting, and to traverse between the offshore fishing areas and the pulling of their boats on shores. The potential from damage occurs when the drifting nets are caught on an engine propeller or run over by the dredge or support vessel while en route between the disposal and the dredged area. So fisherfolk engaging in trawling and seine have more control over their movement and are expected to be able to navigate around stationary or mobile vessels and equipment. So if it is, you look at this slide in terms of the potential impacts, impact of accidental vessel collision was assigned a value of -8 before mitigation. And in terms of the mitigation measures that we will look at, so we look at the use of radar and appropriate navigation aids. Other mitigation measures would include the dredge plans to be developed. And we also look at publicizing the location and movements of the dredger and the marine vessels in the surrounding fishing areas. In terms of accidental damage to fishing vessels as well, so that was ranked as -6, which is moderate before mitigation, and the same mitigation measures that were mentioned would apply. So after mitigation, in terms of accidental vessel collision, decreased from -8 to -4, which is considered moderate, and accidental damage to fishing vessels and or equipment was reduced from -6 to -4, which is also considered moderate. The loss of nearshore fishing area as well was deemed as significant. So this was considered -16, which is major. And the same mitigation measures mentioned previously apply. And after mitigation, this will still be a serious impact, which we deem as significant. So moving on as well in terms of increased vehicular traffic. So this was assigned a value of -6, as well as the degradation of road infrastructure from transport of personnel and materials to site was also assigned a ranking of -6. So the mitigation measures for both include ensuring that there's scheduled traffic disruptions are well advertised in the public domain and within the community, and the relevant authorities are advised, directing of traffic, implementation of a traffic management plan, as well as most equipment being transported by sea and prefabricated in the area. So after mitigation, with these measures in place, we have a reduction from 6 for increased vehicular traffic to -4, as well as a reduction of the degradation of the road infrastructure from -6 to -2. So within the study area, there are limited opportunities for work, and therefore the construction phase of the port facility can provide temporary employment to locals. It may also provide income for smaller contracting companies, though the leasing of machinery and through the employment of truck or heavy machinery drivers who may live in the communities. And given that the construction will require specialized marine engineering operations, it is unlikely that a large number of persons will be employed. However, there may be a limited number of short-term employment opportunities for skilled laborers in the immediate or wider study area. And once the hiring process commences, the public and the Moruga community will be notified about the process and invited to apply for available jobs associated with the project. So one of the grievances raised during the stakeholder engagement events for the project was the lack of employment opportunities for community residents on the onshore fishing facility. It was indicated that better opportunities would be afforded to potential local residents where available, though better contractor management as well as local clauses during procurement. And this clause usually includes a set minimum percentage of labor that must come from the local community if the available resources are available. And the hiring policy would also state that the hiring process would be non-discriminatory against gender, age, ethnicity, etc. So going back to the table in terms of the employment opportunities, so we note that this is a positive impact. So it was assigned a value of positive 9, and after mitigation, it's assigned a value of positive 12. So I'll continue again in terms of the analysis of the socioeconomic environment. So we know that there would be an impact in terms of opportunities for income, in terms of earning potential of community through the provision of services, whether it be food, etc. So before mitigation, this was assigned a value of 12. No mitigation measures were proposed, and after mitigation, it would remain as a positive 12. In terms of the increased demand for utilities, water and power, etc., before mitigation, it was assigned a value of negative 9. And in terms of mitigation measures, so liaison with relevant authorities on the increased capacity needed during operation, in terms of water tanks, as well as backup water supply, emergency vehicle on construction site. After mitigation, we anticipate that this will be reduced to negative 6, which is considered moderate. And in terms of the changes in the visual aesthetic and scenic value, loss of uninterrupted coastal views, so we know that this would be considered somewhat as well as a negative impact, with a value of negative 12 being major. And since no mitigation measures are proposed, after mitigation, that value will remain. Enhanced security and amenity value is a positive, with a positive 16 assigned to it, and after mitigation, it remains the same. And in terms of improved facilities for fisherfolk, so this is also considered a positive impact. So before mitigation, it has a value of 16, and after mitigation, it has a value of 16 as well. So I'll now move on into the cumulative impacts, which are those that can result from successive incremental and/or combined effects of an action, project, or activity when added to other or existing planned ones. So negative cumulative impacts that may occur during the offshore port project in Moruga include the loss of the benthic organisms during dredging and construction activities, as well as reduction in air quality from dust and emissions, increased noise levels from any other projects that may occur simultaneously, increased traffic, as well as impact existing roads, loss of existing aesthetics, as well as increased presence of vessels in Moruga. Next slide. So we also know that there would also be some positive cumulative impacts from the project, including improved infrastructure that satisfies the demand of the fishing industry, improved economic and employment opportunities, as well as enhanced security and amenity value along the Moruga shoreline. So I'll now proceed to the management and monitoring plans that will form part of this EIA. So in order to achieve the reduction in impact from the offshore port development and proper implementation of mitigation measures, an environmental monitoring and management plan is required. Our arcing structure is governed by several management plans. Specifically for this project, the following plan aims to improve and protect environmental and social well-being of the Moruga project area. So a sediment and turbidity management plan aims to manage suspended sediment levels during the construction and dredging activities. A water quality and management plan aims to protect coastal water quality during construction and operation. An air quality management plan aims to control air pollutants and dust levels. And similarly, a noise level management plan aims to reduce noise levels during the project phases. An emergency response plan, including a spill contingency plan, aims to provide the procedures and rules by which contractors as well as operators to prevent emergencies, as well as in terms of oil spills, and consequently respond to any adverse events that may occur. A coastal zone management plan and a shoreline monitoring and management plan aims to manage the evolution of the coastline and coastal features in line with the National Integrated Coastal Zone Management Policy. Additionally, this plan aims to monitor and respond to changes along the coastline. It should be noted that the Coastal Zone Management Plan, as well as the Shoreline Monitoring and Management Plan, will inform an intervention plan, which will outline the required action and appropriate intervention as deemed necessary. The Traffic Management Plan will be developed to reduce any disruption to road networks, and an Operations and Maintenance Plan will be developed to guide the operations and maintenance of the port facility when it is in operation. A grievance redress mechanism aims to record, communicate, and resolve negative impacts faced by the general public. So this is before we conclude this session, I just want to remind you about the proposed grievance redress mechanism tool that will be used for this project. So NIDCO places significant value on engaging its key stakeholders and the general public. This provides a consultative process where affected stakeholders have the opportunity to express their concerns, their dissatisfactions, as well as grievances, whether actual or perceived, to seek timely resolution. The affected stakeholders, whether individuals or groups, should have access to a transparent, fair, and equitable mechanism that can act with a degree of independence from the project. And the proposed procedure is shown on the screen with the following steps identified. So one, in terms of reporting the complaints either verbally or in writing by calling the number provided on the screen, or sending an email to the address provided to the Community Relations Officer. Then a receipt will be provided to you, so NIDCO will provide a written acknowledgement. All claims will be resolved within a specific time frame of the claim submission. Urgent cases will be resolved in a shorter time. And if you are not pleased with the resolution, there is an appeal process that can be activated. So once a decision has been made, monitoring and follow-up will be done to ensure resolution of the complaint. This will continue to be in place during the construction of the facility and during the operation, and based on the management structures in place. This may be revised with time. So I'll now go quickly into the summary in terms of the EIA findings. So the EIA evaluated the potential impacts from the proposed projects and found that they can be adequately mitigated through the measures proposed. The next steps will be the feedback from the public, which will be incorporated into the EIA. The EIA will also be finalized and submitted to the EMA in Q1 of 2022. Stakeholders will be invited to review and submit comments on the final EIA, which will form part of the administrative record and be made available through the EMA's Information Center, which is advertised in local newspapers and will be available for 30 days. The EMA will oversee the review of the EIA and make a determination on the CEC application. So this now brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. And I now hand you over to Shazara, who will kick off the question and answer session. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Devon, Deja, Medina, and Jade for sharing that information with us. Hi, again, my name is Shazara Ali. I'm an environmental scientist at Coastal Dynamics Limited. And And yeah, thank you for joining us here on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. Just a reminder, if we can bring up the feedback information, just a reminder for those of you who have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat feature on each platform. Make sure to include your name and your organization. Alternatively, you can email us at feedback@coastaldynamics.com, or you can call us on our office line 285-9106 extension 101. This line will be open until 8:30 p.m. tonight. Lastly, feedback and comments can also be forwarded via the online feedback form at the link on screen. So I want to now introduce to you the panelists. Today we have Mr. Devon Rampasad, Project Manager at the National Infrastructure Development Company Limited, NIDCO. Additionally, we have Mr. Nazir Gopal, Director and Oceanographer at Coastal Dynamics Limited. Then we have Ms. Daisha Charles, Project Manager and Coastal Engineer at Coastal Dynamics Limited. And finally, we have Ms. Laishala Carr, who is a Project Manager at Coastal Dynamics Limited. Thank you all for joining us. We are now going to start the question and answer session and bring up our first question on screen. So our first question is, who will be responsible for the upkeep of the facility when completed? Is there going to be any training? This question is from Judy Schoon from the Moruga Unemployment Group.
Okay, good evening again, everyone. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, through the Ministry of Agriculture, they would be one of the lead agencies responsible for the upkeep of the facility. In terms of the actual operations, it's usually done as an arrangement with the fishing community. There would be an arrangement between both fishery division and the community, the fishing community, to upkeep the facility. The areas designated for the national security, which would be the Coast Guard, they would be responsible for maintaining and upgrading that section, but ultimately the government is responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the facility. With respect to training, at this time we don't have plans for any additional training. There's usually training and sessions done under the Fisheries Division, Ministry of Agriculture, and that would continue.
Okay, thank you, Devon. So our next question is from Jasmine Lendo, who is part of the group Confidence Queens of Kesheep Rock River. The question is, what job opportunities will be available and what requirements are needed? I think this question can also go to Devon.
The job opportunities would generally be during the construction. You will have opportunities for general laborers as well as skilled laborers. And during the operations aspect of the jobs would be focused around the fishing industry. So you may have opportunities as a fisherman, or some processing or whatever associated with any additional fish catch and those things that would be generated as a result of the development of the project.
Thanks, Devon. Sorry, I think when I made the introductions, Nazir was not on, so I just wanted to reintroduce Nazir. He is the Director, Oceanographer at Coastal Dynamics Limited. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so our next question is from Matthew McGill from the Ministry of Planning and Development, who asks, what is the mitigation strategy and environmental management plan for the project? Perhaps Deja could answer this question.
Sure, thanks, Shazaro. So thank you very much for that comment. So as we discussed previously in the presentation, the EIA would have been conducted following the main steps that we identified. So firstly, describing the project, then secondly, describing the environment, be the socio-economic the biological as well as the physical environments. And then we would have gone to step 3, which would have been to identify the different impacts as well as rank them accordingly. And then finally, step 4, which would have been in terms of reducing the overall impact, mainly for those that was determined to be significant. So in terms of the presentation, we would have focused on those significant impacts and really provide what the rankings were before mitigation, as well as highlighting the mitigation measures that were proposed and showing what the overall risk factor would be after mitigation. So in terms of the overall feedback that we get from stakeholder engagements as well will be included to also be incorporated as part of the mitigation measures, and all the details in terms of all the impacts that were identified, whether they were significant or major or moderate or low, will be presented in the EIA report.
Okay, sorry, we have another question from Mr. Joseph from TN Tech, who asks, has electrical or power grid requirements been completed by the contractor? I can throw this one over to Devon again.
There has been no electrical or power grid requirements that has been done for the project, as the project is currently in the EIA stage. We haven't done any construction works related to the project, including utility works.
Thanks, Devon. Okay, our next question comes from Daniel Barrett Khan from the TNT Coast Guard. He asks, is shore-based power for larger ships of 440 volts available? And the second part of his question is potable water available from the jetty? Devon?
So at this time, we didn't cater for 440 volts power being made available for larger vessels, but that consideration can be made. We can discuss that further with the Coast Guard if that is a requirement. The potable water availability, yes, potable water would be available from the jetty. And in terms of, I see there's a further addition, how would perimeter security and access be managed? That would be managed together with it would be managed by both the fishing community, fishing facility operations and the Coast Guard operations. Obviously, because the Coast Guard is there would have to be certain areas that would be separated from in terms of accessibility, and those things would be dealt with by the Coast Guard, and the fishing facility would be separate.
Thanks, Devon. Okay. We have another question now from Amy Ramlal from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Affairs. She asks, were potential impacts of fuel pumping, storage, explosions, vessel spills assessed? And the second part of the question is, has an emergency response plan been developed? A member of the CDL team would like to answer. Coastal Dynamics.
So I could start. In terms of the impacts of accidental spills from different sources would have been identified. So we would have looked at sources from vessels as well as the fuel station that would be located on the offshore fishing facility. We would have done detailed oil spill modeling studies on that to identify what the potential impacts would be on the surrounding environment. And if you could just put the question again up so I could ensure that I'm answering all the items in that question.
I can just read out the second part of the question was, has
Okay.
an emergency response plan been developed?
So we would have presented in the presentation, part of the monitoring and management plans will include an emergency response plan, which would also focus on spill contingency plans as well. So I would ask Nazir just to add further context in terms of how the oil spill modeling would have been conducted and what the results show, and any potential mitigation measures that may be applied.
All right. Thanks very much, Deja. So in terms of the oil spill modeling that is conducted, what we do is that we look at different scenarios that are possible from various vessels that will be around and within the facility at various stages of the works. So from the dredges, we look at the total loss of containment of fuel from those vessels in case of any accidental spills or accidents themselves, as well as the loss of fuel, which is diesel, coming from any of the fishing vessels, as well as the storage that is contained in the area. There is some mitigation already incorporated because where fuel is stored, there will be bonded areas to protect fuel from getting into the waters. So there is more management in that respect. Yeah.
So if I could just add as well, I think I missed one point on the potential of fires occurring at the facility. So that impact will be investigated and included in the EIA report. So thank you very much for that feedback.
Thank you both. So we have another question coming in now from, actually it's two questions, one question from two persons from Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. This is from Dave Bayer and Harold Tate, who ask, how can the police service, coastal and riverine patrol unit be accommodated at this facility? Devon, would you like to answer this question?
Sure. So the riverine and the coast, the police service, coastal and riverine patrol unit, they came about a bit after the project was conceptualized and the EIA study began. However, we are going to ensure that the unit can be accommodated at the facility, and because we know that their vessels are a bit smaller, so the draft isn't an issue, and there is space in the facility to accommodate the coastal and riverine patrol unit.
Thank you. Our next question is from, please excuse me, Jasodra Quizon from the Town and Country Planning Division. She asks, what was any application submitted to Town and Country Planning Division for the onshore facility?
Yes, an application was submitted to the Town and Country Planning Division for the onshore facility, and approval was obtained.
Okay, thank you. This next question comes in from Ben Maharaj of the Institute of Marine Affairs, who asks, how has information been provided to stakeholders prior to consultation events in a meaningful way? I'd like to throw this question over to Laishala.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much, Mr. Maharaj, for your question. So there are several criteria that makes an engagement meaningful. It should not just be viewed as a checkbox, so to speak, for a license requirement. So there are several principles that must apply, such as it must be ongoing engagement, it must be non-discriminatory, it must be transparent, it must be respectful, etc. So Coastal Dynamics in the development of or preparation of the EIA, we would have sought guidance from a group of multilateral financial institutions, their environmental and social standards, which included organizations like the IDB and the World Bank. And within that, there are several, or there are 10 main principles that make an engagement meaningful. We have tried to incorporate all of those principles within the development of this EIA and within our stakeholder engagement approach. I wouldn't go into all, but just to give you it in a nutshell, one of the main things is the conduct of stakeholder analysis and the development of a stakeholder engagement plan. In doing so, we are able to identify and to prioritize stakeholders based on, the impacts, based on their how they will be impacted by the project, but also how they will benefit from the project, etc. There also must be prior information ahead of events, and we have conducted quite a number of events not just this, what is seen as this big public forums, but actual smaller engagements with the community. And that is a principle that allows them access to these appropriate forums and methods so that they're open to more dialogue. They have the opportunity to really engage with the project team, to ask questions. So some of that would have included focus group meetings with the community representatives, with the fisherfolk representatives, but with also the fisherfolk themselves being the major stakeholder in this project. We would have conducted one-on-one interviews with them via the telephone, and we would have done site visits, etc. Another way in which it was, deemed meaningful is the provision of feedback. So it's not just that we engage with them and we thank them for their time. It is, as I mentioned, a continuous process. So feedback from the previous engagement events, as Deja would have mentioned earlier in the presentation, that feedback was made available. So a summary was provided to the reps. A summary is made available to the public or viewers on this event via NIDCO's website, their Facebook page, etc. And another major thing that makes the engagement meaningful is the presence of a grievance redress mechanism. So that allows that grievance redress is also a continuous engagement that will not just be during the implementation, but during the project close off, so after the structure has been completed.
Thank you, Laishala. Okay, we have another question now. This question is from Tushara Maharaj from the Ministry of Planning and Development. Sorry, the question just came down. I'm just going to continue reading it here. Right. So she asks, will the carded road rehabilitation works in conjunction with pre-construction and construction work be likely to impact the surrounding community? Devon?
Sure. The existing road rehabilitation works, they aren't, the bulk of that work has been completed. So the works on the project facility, as you would have seen in the timeline, we estimate that the project in terms of the major construction works would begin mid-2023. And a lot of the works are going to be prefabricated at the contractor's yard. So because we would have a lot of the rehabilitation works on the roadway completed, as well as a large proportion of the works being done by prefabricating, the increase in traffic in the community as a result of the construction is not going to be significant to have major adverse impacts on the surrounding community.
Thank you, Devon. So we'll just wait for the next question to come up.
Shaz, while that question comes up, may I just add, sorry.
Sure,
to the fact of stakeholder. Hi. Yes, just to add, while your other question comes on the screen, as I would have mentioned, stakeholder engagement is really a transparent process. So if there are persons who do not have, or of anybody who do not have the opportunity or have not taken the opportunity to provide feedback, it's always an open dialogue. So, as you would have outlined earlier in the presentation, at the moment, we do have telephone lines open. People who wish to call in to express any concern, this will be recorded and will be asked and answered in this live forum. And there is also, after this event, a process where you can submit feedback forms to engage with the project team.
Thank you. And yeah, just a reminder, the contact information is on screen. So for all those who are watching on Zoom or Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to send in your questions or comments in the chat section, and please include your name and organization. Additionally, we have our phone lines open until 8:30 today, and you can also email us at feedback@coastaldynamics.com. So our next question is from Rolf Pegas, who asks, is there any opportunities for local contractors to provide raw materials, aggregate, from a source closer to the project to save road quality from truck truck movement?
We don't usually direct contractors to a specific quarry. However, generally, contractors must ensure that their quarry is registered with the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, and the material that they provide satisfies the quality requirements for the project. And generally once those two criteria are met, a contractor can utilize material from any quarry within the project, within close proximity to the project area.
Thank you, Devon. We'll just wait for the next question to come up on screen. I think this may be a follow-up question from Tushara Maharaj, I think from the Ministry of Planning and Development. Can you provide examples of intervention methods to manage coastal erosion events?
Sure.
Perhaps somebody, I will throw this question over to Nazir.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so in the interim, what typically happens in the EIA is that we assess the impacts from the modeling studies. When we look at that, we look at the degree of coastal erosion that is potentially possible in the area. And so where there are areas where there is coastal erosion, we have to firstly monitor the environment when we see particular areas that are prone to erosion based on the modeling. And in that case, what we do is that we will set some trigger mechanisms where important assets such as roadways, properties, and other important assets in the area, when they are affected, we will then come up with various strategies. So that could involve anything from the placement of shoreline structures to protect the area. In some cases, the mitigation is actually attended to by some of the works that are taking place. So for example, the way a barrier is created in the area provides a calm region in the back of the structure, in the lee of the structure, and that calm area also assists in providing some mitigation. Because the environment is very variable, and while you can make every best effort to assess what that impact can be, it is important to monitor that change and set these trigger mechanisms, in which case we will have a range of remedial actions that can take place, whether it's the construction of coastal structures, the movement of assets if that is possible. If they're assets that cannot be relocated, then we will have to look at ways of protecting them as well. Zara.
Thank you, Nazir. We'll just wait for the next question to come up on the screen. Okay, so we have another question from Harold Tate from the TTPS Riverine Unit. He asks, how will the dredge material be used? Will it be used as fill or disposed of?
I think I can take this question.
Yeah, definitely.
The dredge material, we would have found that the dredge material is pretty fine. It's very clayey, and it isn't very suitable to be reused as reclamation fill. So therefore, the material would be disposed of at a site offshore. And this site would be approved by the Commission of State Lands, and that would be made available as well once we have that information.
Thank you, Devon. Next question, please. Just want to remind everybody once again to please feel free to leave your comments in the NIDCO Facebook page, YouTube page, or on the Zoom live stream. And we also have our phone lines open, as well as you can email us at feedback@coastaldynamics.com. So I see we have a next question now. This one is from Julius Smith from the Ministry of Planning and Development, who asks, what provisions would be made in the operational phase for the storage and disposal of waste such as gray and black water, solid waste, hazardous waste, etc.? Devon, you can probably answer this.
Sure. So we have as part of the facility a wastewater treatment plant, and that treatment plant would treat the black water and gray water, as well as whatever wastewater would be generated from the offshore facility. Hazardous waste, we do not anticipate any hazardous waste to be generated at the facility, and therefore that would be the mitigation measure for dealing with hazardous waste. But we do have measures in place in terms of a wastewater treatment plant. Also, we'd have, as part of the EIA, a waste management plan that would give further details in terms of the intervals and those things related to the waste disposal and waste management.
Thank you, Devon. We'll just wait for the next question to come up on screen. And here we go, another one from Mrs. Smith from the Ministry of Planning and Development, who asks, would there be a user fee arrangement in place for larger vessels and foreign vessels?
Larger vessels, firstly, foreign vessels won't be allowed into the facility. The facility doesn't include a customs office, so therefore they won't be able to process the arrival of foreign vessels or foreign persons at the facility. It's not an international port per se, it's a local port for the local fishing community. So there won't be any fees, or that aspect of the port won't be facilitated at the port. In terms of the usage of the port for, let's say, general use for the fishermen and those things are usually done with the Ministry of Agriculture, Fishery Division, together with the fishing organizations and the fishing groups in the community, and they usually develop an arrangement with respect to any fees or how usage of the facility is finalized.
Thank you, Devon. Just a reminder that we will be wrapping up the event soon. We hope to have just a few more questions. So we have another one coming in from Tushara Maharaj, again from the Ministry of Planning and Development. She asks, what would have likely contributed to the exceeded iron and copper levels detected in the respective rivers during the baseline study?
So sure, I think I could answer this question.
Okay, thanks,
so in terms of the results that we have seen in terms of the levels for iron and copper levels, we really think that this may be attributed to activities that are happening nearby. So potential emissions and so on within the riverine environment may be a result causing increased levels in terms of iron and copper levels.
Thank you, Deja. I think we have some time for a few more questions. Okay, we have another question from Julius Smith. I believe he was from the Ministry of Planning and Development. He had a question related to the potential impacts to the benthic environment. Deja?
Yes. So during the presentation, we would have identified the impact to the benthic environment as significant. The impact would really be the removal of benthic communities, more so because the dredging activities would involve the removal of sediment material from the seafloor. So within the areas that are likely to be dredged, so this will be the dredge channel for the Coast Guard vessels, as well as the dredging that is to occur along the approach trestle, we would anticipate that there will be significant impact to the benthic environment that unfortunately cannot be mitigated sufficiently for it to reduce to a lower impact risk factor.
Okay, I think we have just two more questions. Okay, so this question comes in from Ben Maharaj of the Institute of Marine Affairs, who asks, what procedures are in place to survey the site for sunken heritage? And is this outlined in the EIA?
I can try with this question.
Okay,
so As Thank you. So thanks again for the question. With respect to any dredging activity, so usually the dredgers themselves, because dredging is such a high level and expensive operation, anything that is foreign to the seafloor can potentially damage the dredging equipment. So what they will do, they will ensure they will do an assessment of the footprint of the area to be dredged, to ensure that there is no objects that are going to be there when they do the dredging operations. So that is with respect to the area that will be dredged or will be impacted, which is really within a dredge channel.
Thank you, Laishala.
I should also say that if, for example, there is anything that is, it will be immediately noted or notified to the National Trust, and then further investigations will have to be assessed together with that organization.
Thank you, Laishala. I believe we have one last question before we wrap up this evening. This question comes from Aikida Edwards, who is a member of the Laloon Empowerment Group. Laishala, I believe you might be able to answer this question, or perhaps Devon, what is the overall cost of the project?
I think Devon? I would take this question. The overall cost of the project at this time, we don't have an overall cost of the project because the EIA is still going on, and we still have to account for mitigation measures, the costing for those things in the project. Also, just to note, we generally try not to put cost estimates before construction, before we tender for construction works. That usually tends to skew, because we try to keep it open. So therefore, we don't usually throw any figures out in terms of estimated construction costs at this time.
Thank you, Devon. So I believe that might be the end of our questions for now. Yes, so I think if that's the end of the questions, I want to thank all the panelists again for providing feedback to all of our viewers' questions. At this time, I'd like to invite Devon back to say a few words, please.
Okay. So just in closing, I would like to say thank you to everyone who participated in this public consultation this evening, to the members of the public, to the representatives from the various state enterprises, the various government agencies, as well as the NGOs, both locally and community-based, as well to the team that would have put together the public consultation, the presentations, the people from Coastal Dynamics, and the project manager, Deja Charles, and her team. Thank you all very much, as well as for the persons who would have supported from NIDCO. Thank you all very much. And also, and just everyone, I think the presentation was, the consultation, was good. It was informative. I trust we would have responded sufficiently to all your questions, and as you would have mentioned before, that the opportunity still exists for you to continue asking questions. And I know that this presentation and consultation would be up on our social media platforms for persons to view for a few days before. So you can also ask questions at that time, and we would try to respond as best as we can. Thank you all very much, and have a good night.
Thank you, Devon. And just to kind of continue off of that note, participants are reminded that they can view this event in its entirety after it's ended. For those of you who registered on Zoom, a recording link will be emailed out to you. And in addition, those who are on Facebook or YouTube, these videos should remain on for a week. I believe that's until February 2nd. For further information or to submit additional comments, you're invited to please email us at feedback@coastaldynamics.com, or you can call us at our office line 285-9106. For tonight, it will remain open until 8:30 p.m., but you can also call us over the next week, Monday to Friday, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Lastly, you can also feel free to use drop boxes. They're located at several locations in the Moruga area. So these are Bourgeois Farmers Market, Marak Community Center, Cooper's Pharmacy Limited, as well as Palm Stop and Shop. Lastly, you can use the on-screen link. That's that tinyurl.com/Moruga 2022 feedback. That will lead you to a feedback form where you can give us any kind of feedback, comments, any issues you may have, and we will respond accordingly. So I just want to say thank you once again to all of our viewers, to our panelists, and please, everyone, stay safe. Thank you.